Let's make some more changes to our program. First change I want to make is to move this print statement, which presumably is printing out the final value of sum, down at the end of the program, so it's the final thing that the program does. Now at this point, the program becomes roughly, given some values x and y, I want you to calculate the value of sum somehow with x and y and some loop, and then eventually give me its value. So this stuff in here is give me x and y, calculate some value. So let's just go down here and let's just write the name calculate sum. And we'll say in order to calculate the sum, we need two values, x and y. And it's going to send back some result. And I'm going to take all of this code that calculates the sum, and I'm going to dump it inside that routine. And so now this stuff that I've repeated here really becomes calculate sum and give it the value of x and y. And whatever that calculation does will come back into a variable there called sum. Now, we've got a little bit of a problem here. We're not quite finished with calculate sum. Calculate sum is something that, given the two values, gives back an integer. So that means after we're done with the loop, we need to send back the value that we calculated, which was sum. Now, the clip, we're got a slight little problem here. I'm just going to introduce a keyword, and I'm not going to tell you why that thing has to say static in order to make some of the errors go away. We'll just save it for a second and see what happens. Still got an error here, and it looks like it says it's undefined, and the reason it's undefined is because we didn't spell it right. That thing's missing a C. So there's calculate sum. Okay, all set to go. This happens to look a little bit ugly. Now it turns out that you could worry about what the Java formatting rules are, but it's much simpler to go under the source format menu item and say just make it pretty for me. And it will nicely rearrange it and make it pretty. Notice that little error tag is still up there, but you'll find quite often that if you save it, it makes the errors go away. So now what does the program do? It introduces a couple of variables to start with. It calls the calculate sum routine given those values, and it says calculate that sum however you do it and give me back the value. And then it prints that thing out for the user. Most of the work in the program has been isolated into something that's been given a name that does all of the work, and we don't have to see how it's actually done anymore. To run this program, we say, well, what's the interesting stuff? The interesting stuff is to see what happens here, so we'll set a breakpoint there, and then we'll run with the debugger. The debugger runs and executes the first couple of statements, gives you the values of x and y, and then stops at this line at the place where you're about to calculate sum. Now, at this point, we have two choices. One option is to just step over this and see what the value is that comes back without only caring that calculate sum somehow does its job. If you actually want to see what calculate sum is doing step by step, the best thing to do once you've stopped here is to go down and put another breakpoint just inside calculate sum. Then hit the resume button, which is this one, to say keep going until you hit another breakpoint. And no surprise, you hit a breakpoint almost right away. While we're here, take a look at this window in the upper left. This window is trying to say that main at line 7 called calculate sum, and calculate sum is currently at line 14, which is this one, about to do its job. Conversely, you can read this as saying after calculate sum is done doing its job, it will return to the main program at line 7 with the correct value, or with a value. Okay, so we're currently sitting in calculate sum. At this point, we've got these values x, y. These values are copies of the values that were in the main program up above. They aren't the same values, they're copies that happen to have the same name. We'll do a step over. There's the initial value of sum, and then we'll proceed to step over and watch this loop go as it changes the value of sum to eventually calculate the final value. At this point, if you're doing step overs, life is going to get a little bit tedious because you're going to have to go through every single step in the loop, which is going to take some time. There's an interesting little shortcut here. What you can do is you can put another breakpoint down just at the return statement, which is after it's done the summation. Okay? Remove this breakpoint if you no longer need it, and then hit the resume button, and that will run the loop really, really fast from this point onwards until it exits the loop and just before it returns back to main. So you'll now hit the resume key, it hits the next breakpoint, and we're set to return a value of 140 back to the main program. Where's this return statement going to go? If you exit calculate sum at line 20, it's going to go back to the main program at line 7. You can click on there to see where it's going to go back to. This thing is waiting for calculate sum to finish. So the topmost one on this pile of things up here is the only one that's currently executing. Back to there, do a step over, you'll see it go back to main, step over to create main's version of the sum variable, and now you're all set to print out the final value, but we already know what it's going to be. So at this point, we'll kill off this thing because we're done with it for now. We don't need to see the final printout.